Welcome to Unfixed. This podcast explores the intersection of artificial intelligence and the institution of higher education. I am Zach Justice, Professor of Communication Studies and Director of Faculty Development.
And I'm Nick Janos, Professor of Sociology.
We are employees of Chico State, and we will discuss some of our work, but this podcast is not affiliated with Chico State, and the views expressed here are not representative of the university. Nick, how are we doing today?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing good, but I could always do better with some good advice.
Oh,
that was an advising joke.
Oh.
Because today we're talking about academic advising.
Cue the laugh track.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Jamie, make sure to get laughed. Especially, I want Nick laughing at that joke. So today we're talking about academic advising and artificial intelligence. And we really need to start with an overview of how advising currently works on a campus like ours, or doesn't work, as the case may be in a lot of instances. And Nick and I are actually from programs with different types of models. So Nick, can you start off by talking to us a little bit about what professionalized or like assigned advising looks like?
Yeah, so in sociology, things have changed recently, but let me just take you back real quick to the before times. So for a long time, we had faculty advisors. So a faculty member would get one course release to be the advisor, and you would have hundreds of students, lining out the door, like literally in the hallways, like out the door, waiting to get their appointment. And I understand why they did this. And, I have colleagues who say, we need to bring back those faculty advisors because faculties know the programs and they can sell sociology to those students. But also, let me tell you, for the most part, often at the end of the day, faculty's work life never came down to how good an advisor I am. Now, I'm sure there's some exceptions, but it was one other job tacked on to your other 10 jobs that you had to do. So for a long time, we did that. And I don't think it worked because it was inconsistent. Sometimes some faculty would do a great job and then they would leave, and then a new one would do a mediocre job. And so ultimately, I think our students weren't getting what they needed. Faculty make mistakes too, because they don't know the intricacies of every rule and course and all this kind of stuff. So over the last 5 or so years, we've kind of moved towards a professionalized model in which we began hiring some of our lecturers to basically become full-time advisors. And then the College of Behavioral and Social Science also got their own professional advisor who that's their job. Like, they become really good at it. They know the literature, they know what they're doing. And we kind of moved away from that sort of faculty advisor to semi or professionalized advisors who spend hours with students, because it takes hours to really meet the needs of the students. And I think we've seen actually a lot of benefit to that, but we still are in that in-between zone. And I know not every university does that. So what other kind of full professionalized model is there?
Yeah, so it looks lots of different ways, and we're both talking about major advising. In my home program of Comm Studies, we do it how you used to do it,
okay.
And that the faculty are assigned a swath of students, and then we provide advising for them. But as you said, it's inconsistent how good it is. I always took it really seriously, and I thought I was pretty good at it. At the same time, there was just so much that I did not know, and it was tough to make it a priority because we've kind of joked about this, even though there's some tragic consequences. You could be the best advisor on campus or the worst advisor, and it doesn't make a big difference in your promotion file.
It doesn't. I'll just admit, whenever the call was, hey, who wants to be the next advisor? I would put my head down and turn my eyes away. I ran from that job.
Yeah, it is. It is tough. There's a lot of information to take in. And that's why some colleges and some universities have full professionalized advising where they have full-time staff and that's all that they do. And there is a segment on our campus that works like that. Their general advising for general education is centralized. But the truth is, advising's a little bit of a mess on our campus and on a lot of campuses. And it's not because any individual is doing a bad job, but any given student may have 5 different advisors. They'll have a major advisor, a minor advisor. If they're doing a pathway, they have a pathway advisor, somebody that is in GE, a graduation advisor. If they're in athletics, somebody does advising for athletics. If they are in a special support program like EOP or REACH, they also have an advisor associated with them for that. So they are getting
a lot of advice.
Yeah, lots of advice. Yeah,
that's a lot of advice.
Yes.
So, but even just an advisor is still a little vague, because I think we need to talk a little bit about the different kinds of advice that gets given. There's students who are looking for like, I just need 3 units, like what's available, or I am interested in a major, how many units do they have? That's different than like, I kind of want to become a doctor eventually. Like, what classes should I, these are two different kinds of things that get sucked into advising that one person might be doing both kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to tell a quick story that I think will illustrate that, and then I'm going to ask you to talk about the different data sources that have to be brought in for this, because there's a lot of it. So in doing faculty advising for comm studies, one of the things that would happen is comm studies requires a minor. And every year I would have somebody that was a junior or a senior walk in my office and say, hey, I just realized I need a minor and I don't really care which one. I just want to graduate on time. What am I closest to? And I would just look at them with an incredibly empathetic but blank look on my face, because not only did I not know, but there was no way for me to figure that out without going through and making hours worth of handwritten notes and going through every conceivable scenario. And it just highlighted some of my limitations as an advisor, not just me as a faculty member, but also me as a person, because there's so many different data sources that come into this that feed into those different conversations about everything from course selection to career trajectory. So Nick, can you talk real quick about some of those different data sources and why it is that it's so hard to sort of compile and keep track of all those pieces?
Yeah, while I've never done advising, I do know about, the different data sources, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the connections here to AI in a minute. But one of the first places to start is the university catalog, which, let's be honest, is not the easiest to navigate and figure out. And there's all sorts of fine print, and it's not designed to be a curriculum builder just by looking at it, right? And students have to think about the different requirements and the prerequisites and the 300 levels and this level. That requires a kind of faculty level and above knowledge about all of that stuff. So you kind of have to have the catalog, and the students have access. But within that, there's also all the GE requirements. So, I'm not going to get into our GE program at Chico and how that's changing and changed over the years, but it's confusing, right? Between how many and which classes count and which don't, all the symbols, and you need a diversity one and this and that. So there's that. But the class schedule is also a living document, while as the catalog is not. The catalog is in the Slow University episode that we recorded. We talk a little bit about that and the fact that it's a very slow moving kind of thing, but it's on a 1 to 2 year cycle of when it actually gets updated. But the course schedule is really something that chairs are making up almost until the day class begins at some times, right? And as we know, it can also change during the semester as well. So there's all of these different buckets, and as from a student perspective, and also as a faculty perspective, I think that that's pretty hard to understand and also navigate. There's very few tools that just bring it all together. Now, I know the back end, the advisors have a lot more sophisticated ways, but from the front end, not super intuitive.
Yeah, so I hope your takeaway from this is that advising is tough, and it is a tough job even for the most capable and hardworking faculty member or professional advisor. And at some universities, and we'll have this linked in the show notes, but they've done studies and realized that an advisor that's a professional advisor may have an advising load of 1,000 students. That's impossible to keep track of, right? There's just no way that the human brain can do that. And that results in some not great outcomes. You won't be shocked to hear that, especially at times where advising loads get really high, it has a disproportionately negative impact on first-generation students, because oftentimes it's on them to navigate the university system, and they aren't as equipped if they're the first person in their family that's gone to college. And obviously, there's a lot of overlap between first-gen students and underrepresented minority students. So yeah, you can understand how this sort of ends up overlapping with a lot of different things that we value, or at least say that we value, in higher education. All this has been known for a while. And so when we started experimenting with generative AI, Nick and I started wondering, what role could AI play in advising? Nick, can you talk to us a little bit about some of the failed experiments and early conversations we had?
going back to the fall and winter of 2022 and 23, so January 23, I don't know what it was. We're just hanging out, talking, and somehow we realized that, you know what, like everyone's talking about papers and assignments being obsolete. No, what about advising? Because we just described to you the challenges from the student user perspective and even the faculty perspective. The reason I didn't want to ever be advisor because I found it intimidating to navigate all of that and to become competent at that. Not to say I couldn't do it, but I just didn't. It was a lot of mental load. So we said,
in fairness, I don't think you could do it.
Okay, thanks. It's good. That's great because I never did it, and I was always corrected. No, I couldn't do it. Okay, but we were playing around with the generative AI in early days, right? This is like the 3.0 model, and we're like, oh my God, what if we could utilize this to create an advising bot, basically? But what if what we need is all those data sources? So we started trying to cobble together the power of the generative AI, but we didn't have a back end with all the data. So we tried it first. Remember, we were like, hey, search the internet and try to figure out like what could we feed it, and no go back in those days. But what did we do next? Because we knew we had something there where we had this model that could like talk to you like a person and solve problems with you, but we were missing the data.
Yeah, so we were emailing people trying to like design stuff to scrape, and there was even an ill-fated couple of days where we tried to learn how to code.
Yes.
So doing some very basic coding in order to build something that would sort of utilize the ChatGPT horsepower to apply it to a particular data set. Yeah, this was before custom GPTs existed.
Right, this is before custom GPTs. We were learning like Python. I had the terminal open on my Mac. We were like, okay, we got this. We can do this.
You're being really generous to say that we were learning Python.
Okay, we were.
We had a how-to guide to learn.
we were ambitious.
We were copy-pasting just the absolute hell out of the sheet. So, yeah.
But the problem is that data. So then we reached out to our colleagues over in advising and said, look, we've got this idea. We think that at the very base level, something like ChatGPT could answer those questions that a student might have at 11 o'clock on Friday night. What class do I need to take next semester that would get me to help graduate the following spring? It's like, that's not what a human being needs to be asked at 11. The advisors are all out, going to sleep or whatever, right? But their students need these things, and they have questions they want answered. And so we went to our colleagues over in advice and said, look, we got this idea, but what we're missing is the data. So they started to share some of the data with us, right? And so they were like, yeah, okay,
Turns out the data is a little bit hard for them to get in the form that we needed it to. And so we went back and forth. Nick and I actually got invited in, and we watched a demo of somebody that put a wrapper around one of these models that could do some advising work.
Well, yeah, it turns out there's some companies that are also had the same idea, and we're working on that.
Yeah, and there was a flurry of activity and some articles about this about a year ago. Again, we'll have those linked in the show notes, including this really great rundown from Inside Higher Ed, I think from almost exactly a year ago, that covers a lot of these challenges with AI and advising.
Well, on that, I think that one of the conversations that it became apparent to us with talking to our colleagues in advising was that it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, is advising is many different things. And there's a whole bunch, and this is what the Inside Higher Ed article says, there's a whole bunch of activities that we're having human beings answer. Questions about course schedules, units, all that kind of stuff that is really could be well served by an AI assistant and allow the advisors to do other things with the students, right?
Yeah, because as Nick said, it's not just about course selection and maybe a schedule for me there where I don't have to come to campus on Fridays, right? Like there's this human element that is oftentimes missing. And so how is it that you can use one to leverage the other? So we sort of went back and forth. We kept hitting a wall here and there, but then things changed a little bit with the CSU partnership with OpenAI and the integration of chatgpt.edu. And so now we had this sort of like closed system, and Nick and I started to think, what could we do with that? And so what we did was we eventually built a prototype advising bot. So we got a hold of some pretty crude files, a sort of toned down version of the university catalog and a Microsoft Excel file that was the archived course schedule, not the current live one, because We had to feed it sort of static documents. But we got a hold of those data sources and then went through this iterative process where we would ask it questions, identify problems that it was encountering, and then customize the instructions for the custom GPT to say, do this, don't do that, only search the internet if you can't find the answer here. It was work, but we came out the other side with a prototype advising bot.
Yeah, you put a lot of work into that. And I think it also shows the incredible evolution of ChatGPT over the last 2 years. We couldn't do that stuff the way you could do it now with the tools that we had when we started thinking about this 2 years ago.
Think about how stupid we'd feel if we'd spent 6 months learning Python.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's time you can't get back, Zach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the ways that I really trained it on my knowledge of what was in comm studies. But one of the things I wanted to know was, how would this work for something that hadn't been specifically trained on and just had general instructions? And so I asked our awesome producer, Jamie, to ask it some questions, because there are some hyper-specific examples. She's in the School of Education, specifically in special education. And we asked Jamie to ask it some questions. And now we're going to ask Jamie to come out from behind the soundboard and join us in the studio to talk about some of that experience. Jamie, tell the listeners a little bit about who you are and what you teach.
So my name is Jamie Gunderson. I am faculty in the School of Education. I specifically work with teachers, special education teachers, multiple and single subject educators, and I work in the undergraduate and graduate levels.
So I was excited to show the advising bot to you and to Nick, and I was pretty sure that it wasn't going to work very well outside of comm studies, because that was my expertise. That's what I trained it with. You asked it some really specific questions about credentialing. What did you ask, and what did you think of the responses?
Yeah, well, one of my roles is to coordinate special education programs, and there's any number of ways that you can enter and obtain any number of special education focused credentials. So I wanted to see if the bot could actually differentiate between some of the different ways you might enter and exit our program. And so that's different testing, different like requisites that you might take. And so I started asking it, I think my first question was about assessment, because that's typically the area as a coordinator that I'm struggle with. To tell a student they have to take, 6 assessments, and it has to be 3 of these and 2 over here and this one. That's very difficult, and it does change depending on the subject area, the level of credential that they're seeking. So I asked it plainly. I think I made up like, hey, I want to be an elementary teacher, I want to add a special education credential, and then I want to be a history teacher. And I'll be darned if it wasn't pretty dang accurate.
So, and I think you asked it some questions about what degrees you would earn that then might transition to that particular credential. And was that pretty accurate?
That was accurate too. And that was interesting because that is a very, very specific question. So to give some context, if you want to become a teacher and you have a liberal studies degree, your liberal studies program has some of the requisites for the credential program. And because of that, you are exempt from some of the credential assessments that you would need to take to get into the program. So I asked it very specifically, if I have a liberal studies degree, what tests do I need to take? And it came up, it was really accurate.
Special education and the credential program are really complicated. I was surprised even listening to you how complicated they are. How could you imagine something like this fitting into the puzzle for students, for faculty, for advisors?
Well, I think our advisors already really do a good job of understanding the program. They meet with students individually. I think this would enhance it kind of a lot like where our conversation has gone today. The students still need that human aspect for sure, but you don't need to make a meeting to like figure out what test to take and where to take that test. That is stuff that you as a future educator, I hope that you can go out and seek that information, find that knowledge. So I think, it would take a lot of kind of the day-to-day procedural work off of our advisors and maybe let them do more of the like, okay, tell me why you want to be a teacher, or have you thought about, you know, what you want to teach versus like, oh, I want to be a teacher, I want to teach this subject. There's no time for the why and the discussion and what interests you, what kind of subjects are you thinking about, what kind of ages of kids do you like to work with. There's not a lot of time for that because it's like, okay, multiple subject, follow this course plan. Oh, single subject, follow this course plan. Special education, follow this course plan. And so maybe we can become a little bit more personalized in a profession that is extremely personalized. Start asking more questions about what kind of educators they want to be versus just like, here's how.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was totally awesome, and I appreciate you sharing your insights with the listeners. And now the listeners know that Jamie is a person that does exist.
She's not a bot.
Very exciting for everybody.
We don't build bots for everything, do we?
No,
not yet. Okay, so let's talk about implications, though. Let's zoom up a little bit and kind of think about implications. Now, I'm going to start with the motivation that our motivation when we first thought about this was this idea of an always on, always available, always accessible advisor for university students. Because I think the realistic model is that students have these, and just like us, we're driving, we're walking, we think of things. And if you have to wait for the appointment that's 2 weeks away, unless you really write it down or know what you want to say, you're going to lose some of that. But imagine if you just pull out your phone and you go to the university's advisor bot and you have a quick conversation about those sort of technical things that the model that even yours can do, that Jamie just talked about, can kind of give us that always on, always available, always accessible.
Yeah, listeners, if you haven't caught on, we're going to do this in kind of rapid fire round because we think there are quite a few implications here that we want to work through. The second implication for the possibilities of as an advising bot is students don't always want to talk to us. And that's not just because Nick and I are jerks. Sometimes students find professors intimidating. Sometimes our office hours don't match up. Sometimes they might be embarrassed with the question that they have to ask. So the choice isn't between a professor who is always accessible and available and an advising bot. Oftentimes the choice is between this thing that I feel comfortable sort of asking a question and I'm not going to feel stupid or intimidated or not talking to anything. And that's where I think the comparison of this oftentimes gets lost, especially on people in higher ed, is it's not a choice between a bot and the ideal. It's a choice oftentimes between nothing and a bot.
Yeah, absolutely. And the second one I want to talk about, or the third one total here, is we've been talking about this as a tool for students. But I think that the articles that we've been reading, the people we've been talking to, is that this is actually an incredible potential tool for advisors themselves. Because it goes back to something I said earlier about offloading some of those mundane technical kind of questions that takes up hours and hours. I mean, if 1,000 students do the math, if every 20 minutes of them are talking about this stuff that you could just have them do on their own with the advising bot, it frees up the advisors to spend more of the time talking to students around issues about how they're doing in life and what matters to them as human beings, right? And the other thing is that those are actually combined. So think about an advisor who is talking to a student and can't remember a technical detail. Instead of saying something that's incorrect or saying, I'll get back to you, they can use the tool to look it up, check it out, and then solve the problem then and there.
And I want to animate that with a specific example. So I remember being an advisor and going to a meeting where a new general education program was going to be rolled out. And the people that were presenting it were really excited because they're like, this is a streamlined program that'll be more accessible by students. And then they gave us a handout. You unfolded it. It was an 11 by 17 sheet, double-sided, printed front, back, and everything was in like 8-point font. And they were so excited about how streamlined and accessible that was. And I remember just sitting there thinking, we are so cooked because there is zero chance that I am going to read and understand this or even be able to use this as a reference tool. But maybe if I'm sitting in that sheet and I'm able to get in a specific query, like Nick was saying, it's going to pull the section from that sheet that is going to be helpful for me. But here's a question for you, Nick, setting you up for your next segment. Will it be accurate?
Well, obviously it'll get stuff wrong. But actually what I've thought, the way I've thought about generative AI and human beings is hello, human beings get stuff wrong all the time.
Heard it
right?
here first.
Heard it here first, folks. Did you know people don't know a lot and get stuff wrong all the time and make mistakes? So that's already happening. Mistakes are happening. And to be honest, let's go back to one of the reasons I didn't want to be an advisor, is because that's a lot of responsibility. You tell the student, oh, you need to take this class. It turns out actually it was the other one. You wasted not only their time and their money and so on and so forth, right? So it will get stuff wrong, but will it be more accurate than humans? Now, of course, the humans will be using it. The student might not know what's right or wrong, and therefore that's also why we might want to also have human advisors to be helping and guiding some of those bigger critical decisions and double checking. But prima facie, I don't think the idea that somehow because it makes a mistake, it's inferior to a human for the reasons I just stated.
Yeah, and it gets back to one of the experiences that I had when I was building the custom for us, which was I could get in and give it feedback because I had experience advising and I had a degree of expertise, right? Like if we integrate the human expertise into these things, yes, they will still make mistakes, but they're going to be less prone and they're going to have better data access than we do.
Well, I was just listening to a recent Ezra Klein podcast where they were talking about AI. This was in May of 2025. And one of the things that they mentioned was that in developing these tools, you want the advisors developing the tools, right? That's who should be leading. And in the center of the conversation are the advisors and the advisor community to refine them, build them, and deploy them, right? So what do you think next?
So the next disruption that I have is one that goes into part of the title of this episode, is that students I can guarantee you, are already using AI for advising, right? So our choice isn't, are they going to use AI or not? Our choice is, are they going to use something that we build, or are they going to have something that they're just like making up on their own or using on their own that's completely untrained?
Well, look, when we started, remember we thought, oh, Gemini, it's connected to the internet, because it was one of the first models that was connected to the internet, Google's Gemini. And so we actually had an idea. We were like, oh, maybe this is the solution. Tell Gemini to point towards all of our online data from the university for schedule, for what's the course manual called?
Yeah,
like, get it out.
catalog.
The catalog, thank you. And it didn't work. Right. But you can imagine students saying the same thing.
Totally.
Like, hey, this thing's connected to the internet. The internet knows everything, right? So that's a really good point. Now, the last one I want is a little bit more speculative, I think. And it also kind of dovetails over into the chairship side of how departments and programs run, right? So there's a department chair that's also deeply tied to advising around, getting students through our curriculum, through our program, and to degree. And so could we use better data to create programs and course schedules by aggregating all this data together, right? So imagine if we could have more real-time schedule building, curriculum building based upon like kind of student needs as we collect information about what students want, when they want it, and what classes will fill, and what kind of classes we might want to offer based upon, actual data.
Yeah, so I mean, if half the students are putting in a request, build a schedule for me where I don't have to come to class on Fridays, or build me a schedule where I never have to take a class with Zach Justice, right? Like that's a data point that we could use to make decisions about how many classes are we going to offer on Friday? Should we fire Zach, right? Like those are all important and totally reasonable decisions that an administrator could make.
Yes, absolutely.
Veering into irresponsible speculation here.
Yes, and that is our next segment, because I think the implications of the AI advisor are pretty big.
Yeah, you've heard me rail before against the sort of quippy, hope-fueled, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody who uses AI is going to take your job. And you probably already know my opinion about that. And I think this is another instance of that, right? There's going to be huge disruption to this part of how higher ed works. And it's real possible that part of that is going to be job loss. And that may not be at a campus like Chico State, where we have collective bargaining and shared governance. But you can be absolutely sure that at a private for-profit university, they are rolling out advising bots and thinking about how many people they get to let go the next day.
Yeah, I think it's unavoidable with potential consequence with this application of generative AI.
And I want it to be that thing that you've alluded to here and that we initially talked about, which is we offload some of the work of like course and major selection to some of these bots, and then re-leverage the time of people that were doing that towards doing the actual student support that students so desperately need, some of that mental health care, some of that direction towards resources, like all those sort of pieces. That's what I want to have happen.
Right.
I'm just, if you're running a for-profit, you're beholden to the shareholders. You're not beholden to the public. So you're going to make cost-cutting decisions.
Yeah, well, even at public institutions where budgets are drying up, cost cutting is coming anyways. And these are areas that the AI tools clearly show that they can replace a human being for certain tasks. Now, not some of those other tasks, although maybe in another future episode, we can talk about the mental health challenges and AI counselors, but that's not for now. But clearly, the advising is one of those areas where I think some real disruption is in place. But I'm going to take, more of the, not that we want to set this up where I always have like the hopeful vision and you have the doomer vision. That's definitely not going on here. But the last point I do want to say, talking to our colleagues in advising, the advising field had already been going through a transformation, according to her, that is becoming more of that human-centered approach and less away from those technical details. And I think this, if things go well, this could be a way that could accelerate that and reimagine advising as not just like you need to take 3 units of this and you could graduate a semester early. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying this podcast, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. You can find our writing on meltsintoair.org and connect with us on Blue Sky at meltsintoair.bsky.social and on LinkedIn, Zach Justice and Nick Janos. Find these links and more in the show notes. If you have feedback or want to share an idea, email us at unfixed@meltsintoair.org. Thank you to Jamie Gunderson for producing and editing the show.